Welcome in again to our freight conversation. And this week we have a great guest to look forward to some great answers with. Ryan SCHREIBER joining us from Metaphora, joining us on location. Ryan, how you doing?
I usually am joining from location, yeah. But this location, beautiful Las Vegas. So I'm down a lot. I don't know. At some point, somebody might come and grab me and try and break my kneecaps. But otherwise, otherwise. So if that happens, maybe cut that out in post. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty well. Thanks, man. Good to see you again.
Oh, I'm keeping that in there. Absolutely. Let's go ahead
Them
here.
dragging me
Obviously,
off. Ah.
yeah. So last week, excuse me, we had Ann Rinke on, president of TIA, and you know how this works. So she posed an idea, and here's what she said.
Well, I think a couple things. So we talk about the security of freight. We talk about collaborating on freight. We have some bad actors in our freight space that are frauds or commit fraud or are committing double brokering or committing, they're dispatch agents who are essentially brokering freight. And will the railroads care? No, probably not. But certainly the carriers will care and the shippers will care about how we can actually improve that. We have a regulatory agency that's constrained in its resources and they think in its authority to regulate that space because these are commercial events, not safety events. We would argue that these actually are safety and security events. We had a member who arranged transportation for a load of meat last 2 weeks ago. Turned out it was to a fraudulent carrier who gave it to a dispatch service out of some other country. Long story short, we don't know where this meat is. So my point is there is fraud in that market. How can we figure out in the marketplace, how can we figure out ways if we can't get FMCSA because of constrained resources to be engaged, what can we do together to collaborate? And I think there's interest there. Certainly we've talked to some in the owner operator space. I think there's some interest there of how do we actually work together to figure out solutions.
So with that, bad actors at play. How do you deal with it? Big question. What's your take?
It's interesting. It's something that I'm actually super, super passionate about. So as you know, as most people know, my background is as an attorney. Like I don't practice, but it's something I'm really passionate about. So in the industry, carrier compliance and onboarding and monitoring carriers, et cetera, is really, really important. And everything that Ann said is true, right? We have major issues at the legislative level, at the administrative agency level with the DOT, the FMCSA, and Congress. Funding is an issue, et cetera. So, we're not going to solve fragmentation. So, I mean, let's kind of take some of the things off the table. Sure, if there was consolidation, that would be helpful, but it's not going to go that way. Additionally, the FMCSA is not likely to get additional funding in ways that would allow technology to solve the problem directly. So there systemically is not going to be major change that's going to save the day. So realistically, as you kind of look at the ecosystem that we have, right, where we are, the players that we have involved, et cetera, we need to really consider how we're leveraging data to make better decisions at the organizational level. And I think there's a couple of ways in which we need to think about that. Number one, what's going to be really, really important is, and this is starting to happen. I'm glad it's starting to happen because for the longest time it wasn't happening, but companies are thinking differently about data and understanding that all data is not created equal, right, Bill? Like some data has much more value to you by keeping it hidden, and other data points are much more valuable when they're exposed to the market and they can be anonymized and aggregated and we can learn from them, right? So there's a couple of those things that are in play. So number one, that trend needs to continue and accelerate. We need trucking companies, we need brokerages to be able to contribute data to products, to consortiums, to whatever it might be that's going to help us track and identify carriers and bad actors, right? And so that's going to be really, really important, because what that'll allow us then to do is to apply next generation technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, to identify patterns, that we can then leverage to make better decisions, and the like. And so it becomes less of an issue of, kind of figure it out within the four walls of your business, and a little bit more collaborative, but not collaborative, right? In a, I don't get, get without giving, or kind of pure altruism. Like, it's going to be, it's also not going to be like a band all together and like, create a coalition to fight. It's just that's not how people act and operate. And so, there's technology right now that's working on solving this problem. Carrier 411 had tools that were really valuable. That product hasn't kind of evolved over time. RMIS, same concept. So you're seeing entrants come into that market that are trying to work on this problem. You have Carrier Assure by Cassandra Gaines. You have Highway with Jordan Graft, that are working on taking a lot of this information in, and then not just presenting it to a user, but but creating an environment where you're assisting folks in making better decisions by synthesizing that data and being able to do it. So I think that it is a great question. It's something I'm very passionate about. It's an incredibly complicated problem to solve, but it absolutely has to start with data, and it has to start with start with assisting the users in making those better choices, not tasking them with deciding, to read a Freight Guard report and then make a choice.
Yeah. Let me back up just a little bit in that answer and touch on something. Obviously, you talked about people needing to banding together just a little bit. I mean, we're going to talk about, we've got to start to share information and so forth. There's, of course, the great story of how Bismarck united Germany, in the fact that you have him identify three different enemies. He created common enemies amongst these counties, and basically got everybody to say, hey, look, there's our enemy. They all consolidated together, and all of a sudden now you have a big country instead of you have small counties with that. In this particular aspect, is the problem that Anne is pointing out grave enough that people are willing to band together to make that happen?
Well, listen, I think absolutely. The answer to that question is absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I want to go back to it's not a banding together per se.
Okay.
Of like, again, creating like some sort of like, advocacy group or what have you, right? It's about tools. It's about consortiums. It's about creating companies that are going to work on this problem and then participating in that, right? And so, but it's absolutely a great problem. Anne brought up FSMA, Food Modernization and Safety Act, right? FSMA as one perfect example of how grave this problem is. There are major food safety concerns, and like, and what flows along from that, right? I mean, if food is not safe in transportation, if it can become contaminated, if it can get into there are a lot of things that can go along with that. A lot of downstream impacts that can come from that. So if for no other reason, FSMA and the enforcement of FSMA, I think, is something that people are going to have to take more stock of, are going to become more aware of over time, if we have some sort of major outbreaks that relate to the types of things that she was talking about. And listen, there are multiple problems to solve in what Anne described. There's chameleon carriers. There's there's driver hopping from bad actor drivers jumping from one carrier to another. There's out and out fraud of carriers stealing information, of carriers setting up fraudulent entities. There's a lot of different ways in which this problem breaks down, which is why it's not enough to just, hey, let's all be pals and tell each other what's happening. You're going to need next generation solutions like, or that apply things like machine learning for us to identify, who the bad actors really are. And so I think it's a grave enough problem, if for no other reason than because of FSMA, like cargo claims, whatever. No one cares about that, beyond the insurance industry, right? I mean, no one really cares. It's a somebody else problem. But FSMA is, if nothing else, is going to show up at your door literally, and that's what I think will really drive change in the industry. That being said, I've been waiting for FSMA to really change the game since it came into force, whatever it is, 8-9 years ago now, and it hasn't quite. But I do think that at some point you'll have a major food outbreak, or you'll have some sort of major outbreak that FSMA is triggered. They'll and it's going to turn out that maybe it's terrorism, maybe it's just some bad actors like she described. I had a situation similar with like some hot dogs that got out of temp, and the driver just vanished, and all of a sudden the hot dogs were gone. I have no idea what happened to them. They might have gotten sold. They might not. I don't know, and that's a challenge. So that was a long time ago, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
The
they're
hot
not
dogs
out
are
and
all
about
probably
now.
gone. The hot dogs are all probably gone. You probably ate them in a ballpark somewhere and whatever. But
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, we'll go with that then. Just because I find myself in the building at FreightWaves in Chattanooga, and of course we talk a lot about rates, and we talk a lot about trends, and we talk a lot about kind of the positive issues, like the economic indicators, those kinds of things. This issue really doesn't come up that much at all. How much are you hearing about it outside of the walls of Metaphor as you're out and about?
yeah, it's a great question, and it's not enough, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that it is going to take.
Is it one of those issues that it's not like we don't want to bring this up because something bad happened to one of our shipments?
So there is that, absolutely,
Yeah.
which is and that's why you're going to need something with like anonymization, etc. I mean, like if you take there are tools where you can record carriers' bad behavior, right? And like I can tell you definitively that there are a lot of brokers who read those things but don't participate in them. There are areas where you can report on driver bad behavior as carriers, and they don't participate because they don't want it tied back to them, or they don't want like some sort of negative flow through consequences, or they don't want to be embarrassed, or they don't want their customers to find out. And so that's absolutely part of it. But some of it is a misunderstanding around. Some of it's a misunderstanding around how prevalent this problem is, and that it's a somebody else problem. And I liken it in a lot of respects to um, personal injury litigation 10 years ago, right? Personal injury litigation 10 years ago was sort of confined to the, person to person, like individual four-wheeler motor vehicle accidents, that type of stuff, or slip and fall, that type of stuff, right? But as tort reform came in and they started looking up toward, deeper pockets, trucking, et cetera, now, and then so at first, again, it was hey, this is going to happen to somebody else, not me. Now it's at our doorstep, and we talk about nuclear verdicts all the time. And so I think in many respects, this is still a little bit on that front end of the cresting of the wave, where it's only happening to me. It happens to me here or there. It's cost of doing business. I'm trying to do my best. I don't know how to do better. So some of it, especially in the intermediary space, is going to come down to sourcing better capacity and having tools to do that, and understanding how to source better capacity, and having some better actors in the tech space that maybe historically have brought some capacity to surface. And I won't name any company names specifically, but maybe could have done more and will find themselves potentially pushed to the fringes because they haven't done enough to help with this. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Bill, and it's going to take a number of different things to change it, because right now, you're right, there are challenges in changing it at the seat level, at the company level. If you're a broker, getting access to other different, better capacity, like I just need to cover this load sometimes, right? And as a trucking company, if my driver churn is 90%, like I need a driver in that seat. And so it's worth rolling the dice, because the cost of the problem isn't high enough, which is why I'm looking at something like FSMA, where those penalties, the real impact of those things can be so great. I'll roll the dice sometime if, back in the broker days, right? And brokers still do this all the time. I'll roll the dice on a truck, because the chances of something happening, even if it looks a little bit off, they're pretty small, right? I mean, let's be real about it. There are a lot of false positives as much as there are false negatives in that. When it happens, it sucks, but it can be the cost of doing business. So you're going to need a number of different things like that, Bill. I think it's a good point. That's why I like it to tort reform, or excuse me, personal injury.
Yeah. So let's move along because more of a solutions arc, if we can here. And I want to talk at least a little bit about how Freight Tech. You already mentioned a couple of companies that are in this.
Yeah.
In terms and you don't have to necessarily limit it to the bad actor
Yeah.
motif, but Freight Tech obviously is changing the industry daily.
Yeah.
Uh, right now, obviously, you're at one a great conference that's going to have a lot of unveilings, a lot of
Hmm.
talk about new stuff that's coming out. What's How is this industry changing? More importantly, let me phrase the question this way: is the industry changing in a different direction now than it would have changed had there not been a pandemic?
Um.
In other words, is the arc
Wow. That's
is
what a
yeah
question.
yeah is the
Yeah. Yeah.
arc is the arc that trucking was taking before the pandemic been paradigm changed, if you will, to that it's now moving to something else because we've gone from, say, for instance, warehousing has gone from just in time to just in
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that some of the trends that you are seeing, like as an example of just in time versus just in case, are in some ways temporary in nature. I think like
Mm-hmm.
supply chains will not sustain just fiscally a just
Just
in
in case.
case
Yeah.
forever. I mean, by the way, especially with the cost of money being so much higher now than it was 12, even 12 months ago, even 6 months ago, so that some of those broad trends that people want to like kind of scream from the rooftops as like, you know, never, it's never going back to the old ways. Or if you look at kind of the grand arc of like, the kind of the why and the how and how to be sustainable, are not that way. So I think the answer to your question is actually broadly no, especially as it relates to our industry, right? And so there are definitely a change in working style. Most of the big companies that I work with in the space, in their non-asset divisions, or if they're just purely brokers, they do have a hybrid work that like they're never going to bring everyone back to the office full time, but they're also not fully remote. And even the companies that have fully remote options, there are meaningful consequences to being, from a career development perspective, from being one of the remote folks. And so, I think there's built in enough structural inertia to have kind of a rubber banding effect to some of those changes that you're talking about, Bill. So I think broadly the answer to that question is no, because people are still interested in better ways to share information, share data, communicate. So most of the changes that I think have staying power are less grounded in tech as they are grounded in process.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of companies saw that they struggled with these manual processes or relying on shouting across the room and institutional knowledge to get anything done. Those are the things that'll change, and then they'll get baked into tech. But the way that they'll get baked into tech was the same way they were getting baked into tech before: automation, communication, etc. So yeah, I think that it's an interesting question. I had not thought about it, so it's kind of an off the rip. And if you ask me in a week, now that you've put it into my mind, I might answer or react differently. But no, I think that it's largely on that same path. It might have just been accelerated.
Gotcha. So let's kind of stay on that path anyway, and just say it within freight tech, obviously, as it changes and is changing the
Mm-hmm.
freight industry. What do you think are the big movers and shakers that are going to have staying power in this economy, that are going to change things up?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're in an interesting place right now with freight tech. I mean, there has been meaningful change. Um, I talk a bunch about, when I first started on my technology journey, in some respects, in 2015 or so, it was very much kind of like, tell me why I don't need to worry about things, tell me why technology doesn't matter, and that kind of accelerated with the launch of like platforms like Convoy and Uber Freight. Like, this doesn't matter, I don't care, and what have you. But now it is, and then it evolved to, okay, this is important, I don't know where to start, and so I'm just going to do whatever. So really, where we are today is kind of a revisiting of where technology fits, what tools fit, what do I need, why did I procure whatever I did, and how does this suite of tools fit together? In some ways it hasn't changed, and still in some ways still people are thinking about TMS to solve all their problems, and and that's the crown jewel of their ecosystem. And so there is absolutely a grounding effect around TMS that is going to take a long time to change, and so the pace of change is still going to be constrained by the TMS. So you kind of have this companies that have been working on some problems for a while, and then you have kind of a gulf, and then you have really kind of some companies that are working on future problems, and there's not anybody in kind of the middle of that maturation journey. It doesn't seem like, from a tooling perspective, because I get asked a lot, what are you interested, what are you most excited about? So the things that I'm really looking at are things that are still pretty nascent in their adoption curve, in their adoption journey, if you will. So I'm very much interested in anything that impacts cost to serve, and gamification in the industry. And there's certainly like ways to think about. There's a company, Conduit, that I'm really interested in right now. That's an appointment platform that's really working on appointments. There's a lot of people working on appointments right now. They're one of the only ones that I think are working on it in a really interesting way, because they're focused really on that cost to serve element at the shipper, understanding appointments as a flow through problem of labor management. So how do I understand labor working from labor management through to appointments to solve impacts on trucking companies. I'm very interested in anything that's natural language processing related. There's so much chatter around ChatGPT. I just want to shout out to me for being on the front end of that curve. My last company was an NLP brokerage, and I would bet everything on that problem again. And so I've been beating the NLP chat drum for a while. So there's a company like VendorFlow, that are platforms that are enterprise communication platforms focused on applying natural language processing. And then with visibility, you're seeing visibility take the next step. Grace wrote an article about this recently where Grace Sharkey of FreightWaves wrote an article about this recently where she asked me for some input, and I talked about companies like PackSafe, who are adding contextualization and predictive insights in on top of kind of the blue dot. And so those are some of the things that I'm really looking at, is how are we taking the status quo, how are we taking, solving problems that are further upstream with downstream consequences? How are we meeting people where they are to actually solve their problems, instead of kind of giving them a tool and asking them to solve their own problems? Those are the things that I'm really looking at in terms of the interesting stuff that you can do with automation, with efficiency, et cetera. So that's kind of where I'm at with that journey.
You've given us a lot to think about there. That's for sure. Let me ask you this, and I don't necessarily need you to repeat your previous answer, but some of it may pop up in this. So give me one thing perhaps that you're very bullish about within freight, maybe even within freight tech, and then one thing that you're very bearish about as well.
I'm bullish on autonomous vehicles. So I think that, first of all, I think it is an absolute tragedy anytime someone is injured or dies on an on-road collision, because it's just senseless. Like, there's literally no reason for it. And and the reality is, driving is a very difficult task, and humans are not well equipped as animals to drive. It requires doing things that humans are not naturally good at, which is weighing multiple data points, making fast decisions, etc. As literal animals, it's just not how we're wired. And so I think that and then the other thing is, you're relying on other people to be good actors, to be a good driver. You can be the best driver in the world, you can be the absolute best driver in the world, but doesn't matter. And so I'm very bullish on, obviously, the long term of autonomous vehicles. I don't think full autonomy on every lane, everywhere, et cetera, is around the corner, but better, more intentional applications of autonomous vehicles, I think, is something that I'm very, very, very bullish on, both because I hope it happens, and because I think that there are many, many problems that it can impact positively. Driver quality of life being one, driver pay being another. We can pay drivers better if drivers, if we can take the driver out of part of the equation, right? And so because there'd be more money for the driver for the parts of the driving that are hard, like the local deliveries, like backing into docks, stuff like that. So I'm bullish on that. What am I bearish on? You know, like broadly right now, I think I'm a little bit skeptical of um, where things are in the payments universe. You know, fintech is really really popular, and so you know it's made its way into, and then supply chains become popular. So you're seeing a lot of companies work on payment solutions that, like, when I talk to them, because I talk to a lot of startups in addition to talking to, you know, my customers, because I want to know where the puck is going, that I'm like, this isn't a problem. Like, this isn't a problem. I'm also a little bearish on tracking just broadly. Like, we need some better tracking solutions. So I'm kind of bearish on where that is. I'm bearish on, you know, new age TMSs, and then I'm also bearish on appointments. Even though I just mentioned appointments, it's a really sticky problem, or excuse me, it's a really a thick, thorny problem, and it's really really difficult to solve. And I think that the folks that are in the best position to solve it often are not the ones working on it. So I'm sort of, just in terms of the solutions that are in the market, and where things are in their journey, I'm kind of bearish on those different different focus areas right now. So some of them could use other people focusing on them, or interesting solutions, and there are some. Loop for payments is really interesting. I already mentioned Conduit and bigger picture for appointments, but you know, some of them, like TMS, we don't need another. Like, we're good. Like, there's no good TMSs, as you know, that I love, as you know, for every use case, but also, like, we don't need more of them. Like, it's fine. Like, let's think about something else. So I don't know. How's that? Is that okay that I gave you like
That's that.
five?
No,
Okay.
yeah, you're definitely good there. Wanted to back up to your comment on tracking and how much that connects to what Ann talked about in terms of dealing with, and I'm assuming tracking bad actors.
Yeah, I meant like the blue dot tracking. You know,
Okay,
there's an issue. You know, the problem is, it as it stands right now, is we're not tracking the right thing. We're not tracking the freight. We're tracking the trailer. We're tracking the driver. You know, um, like, what good is that? I mean, it's relational to the information that I need, but it's not the information that I need. I don't actually need to know where the truck is, right? I need to know where the freight is. Giving me where the truck is helpful, but I need to know what's going on. I need to know, is the truck stuck in traffic? I need contextual information, as I talked about PackSafe earlier.
sure.
You know, those are the things that I need, and the way that the problem's solved right now is very high friction. It's very very high friction, right? And there's good reasons for, you know, some of the, like, hard stops we have in terms of, like, data sharing, right? Like, because we're not tracking the right thing, right? Because if I'm a driver and you want to track, even if you want to do my ELD tracking, right? But you're tracking me, you're not tracking the freight. And so there are good stuff, but it's still very very high friction. And I think there are opportunities in the space, especially as technology is evolving, to find lower friction ways of tracking the truck and the trailer, to the extent that that's what we need to do right now to understand some of the things that are going on. And then I think we need to, definitely, the industry needs lower friction ways to actually track the freight beyond, you know, and I have no solution for that part, you know, of putting the, you know, other than having you know, little things in the truck, excuse me, in the freight. But then you need so many actors. Again, that's even higher friction. So that's what I mean about tracking.
All right. Well, Ryan, time now for you to kind of direct the conversation whichever way you want to take it. Let's say you're in a room with everybody in freight. You are at the podium. Where would you like the conversation to go?
Well, you and I covered a lot, so as we
Yes,
often
but
do,
we
or as
also
I often do.
we also scratched the surface too. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
whole lot
that's
more we
true.
didn't talk about.
You know, I would really love to. I'm going to go back to talking about autonomous vehicles, because I don't think that we talk about it enough. I think that often the conversation around autonomous vehicles just centers on sort of extremes of the conversation. Oh, they're going to take everybody's jobs, like it's right around the corner, or it's never going to happen. And so I think like there's a middle, right? And I find myself in the middle, which is I'm bullish on it. I think it's really important, and I think we need to figure it out. And also, there are very real challenges to where it is today. So I'd love the next person to start by talking about, what, starting from kind of like a growth mindset perspective of, okay, everything's a problem to solve. Like, what are some of the major problems that we need to solve for right now, that can help make meaningful progress on autonomy, not from a technological perspective, because the technology is pretty good, not from a technology perspective, but from a change management perspective. What do we need to do to change people's behavior? How do we change people's behavior? How do we change people's thought process around autonomous vehicles to drive a better, safer environment on the road, for the professional drivers, and to protect the professional drivers from four-wheelers who are trying to kill themselves and kill other people. So I'd love to hear somebody talk a little bit more about that, because I think that conversation could use some more attention.
Ryan Schreiber of Metaphor, thanks so much for joining us on our Freight Conversation.
Thanks always for having me, Bill.